Hi there everyone, this is Brittany from By Brittany Goldwyn. I post videos about projects and plants, and today we are talking about propagating sage. I actually don't eat a lot of sage, but I love having it in the garden. I love the way it smells, I love the way it looks, and I love its growth pattern of being like a spreading, mounding type plant that looks good for a long period of time throughout the year. So we're talking early spring until it's still looking pretty good now in Maryland Zone 7A on November 1st. So I will walk you through how to take a cutting, how to root it in soil, and then how to plant it. Let's get started. Now, the thing to keep in mind when taking a cutting to propagate from your sage is not to take one that has too many leaves on it, something that's not too big, and something that the leaves are smaller. So when sage grows, it will have offshoots up the stem, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by how to take those offshoots and how to root them. So this right here is one of my perennial sage plants. I did get this one as like a 50-cent clearance plant a couple years ago, and I planted it in the fall, and it comes back every year. It looks more and more beautiful every year, smells great. And this is what I mean here about the different plants going up the stem of the sage. So you could take this tip right here to propagate, and you can certainly do that if you're cutting off the whole stem. But what I recommend doing is cutting off one of these stems and then pulling off all of these little babies to try and propagate those. The smaller a plant is, the easier it's going to be for the plant to establish roots in soil, because it's not focusing all of its energy on keeping bigger leaves like these alive and thriving. So I'm just going to cut this off right here. And then you can see when you look at this, it's got a mixture of bigger leaves and smaller plants up and down the stem. And I will now take these apart to see what is worth trying to root. So the first thing I'm going to do to get started with this branch is pull off any of the leaves that are yellowing, the older leaves, all of this dry stuff here down on the bottom. Just pull that all off. Those are old plants that probably looked good at one point, or old pieces of the plant, but they have just died off over time. So we're gonna pull those off. And then once we get up to a little bit closer to the top, you can see we have some of these right here. These will make perfect candidates for propagation. So you can just pluck those off. And on this one right here, I would actually pull off this leaf right here. And this is what I would recommend propagating. I have propagated quite a few sage plants, and I will say that the larger the plant, the harder it is to root. Here is another example. This one right here is pretty small, but I would still remove those bottom two leaves to expose those growth points. So that's another right there. And as you see, as we're working our way up the stem, here's another big leaf. It's healthy, but I'm still going to pull it off because we do not want to have our cutting putting too much energy into maintaining those larger leaves. This one, again, I would pull these leaves off and probably run with this right here. Now it's possible when you root these, some of these larger leaves will begin to brown and die off when they're in soil, and that is completely fine. Just pick them off as they die. As long as the top of the plant still looks good while it's rooting in soil, it's possible that your propagation will still be a success. So keep that in mind. I'm gonna turn off the camera here and finish picking off all of these little sage plants and then show you what they look like when they're in soil. So now I've got all my cuttings ready. I filled this little pot with some soil, and I already wet the soil down so it's nice and moist. And now all I'm going to do is just stick all of these little sage cuttings down into the soil. You can pot these up separately. I like to save space and pot them up all together in this pot because there's room to, because the cuttings are so tiny, and because not all of them are going to be a success, right? Like some of your propagations are not going to be successful. So I recommend taking a bunch and putting them in a pot. So this is what it looks like here. This is the pot with all of my sage propagations. What I will do now is just keep this in a warm, sunny location. In my greenhouse here is where I'll keep it, but you can also keep it on a patio or a deck or a windowsill or something like that. Just make sure it gets enough light, and most importantly, make sure that you're keeping the soil plenty moist to encourage that root development. So I'll show you what it looks like after this has been rooting in soil for quite a few weeks, maybe even months, depending on your conditions, what the cuttings will look like. And this right here is what it will look like when it's all rooted. So as you can see, there hasn't really been any new growth here, but the plant, other than these bottom two leaves, this one I pulled off, this one I'm about to pull off. Sometimes those older leaves will just die while you're propagating plants. The root system is looking really, really good. I normally would keep this in a pot for a little bit longer to get a little bit bigger and get some new growth, but I would really like to get it in the ground during the fall here in Maryland, which is the best time to be planting new perennials. So I'll just show you how I do that now. So all I'm going to be doing here is taking our little plant, brushing aside some dirt, and popping it in. This area I've already amended with a bit of compost, but honestly, perennial sage would probably be just fine in our native dirt here. I'm piling up some of this mulch and dirt around it just for some additional stability. And then the next step is just to make sure you keep the soil moist as the cutting is getting used to its new home in soil. Hopefully this one will take. It's a little late in the season here in Maryland since it's November now, but I usually have a lot of luck planting perennials in the fall up until at least mid-November. So I hope you found that video helpful in showing you how to propagate and plant sage from cuttings, and I hope that you can fill your yard with sage.